You guys doing all right? Seem more awake than last time. Yeah, I mean, what is it? What could be the cause of that? An hour later, right? Everybody. I know every time the time shifts forward, when I was teaching Sunday school on a regular basis, I was like, oh no, that was rush day. And it always ended up being like, your heart's beating faster and you're like, all these people are counting on you and then you rush through. Yeah, anyway, another point altogether. It's a beautiful day outside today. It's a shame that we're doing this in here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. That was a soft spot. We could. We could. I don't know if this would translate as well, but I can speak pretty loud when I have to. When I have to. So yeah, I'm trying to segue into this. Yeah, I found out that I was going to be off today 2 days ago because they just switched my schedule because of all the Christmas stuff that's happening at work and all that. And so I had to come up with something on the fly. So me and my dad were having a conversation, and well, you're about to find out. The way that I teach is the way that I think. So if you guys want to know what it's like inside my head, it's not that hard, and it's not super complicated. But today I'm going to read from Luke chapter 15, and we'll start at verse 11. I know I don't really like jumping into the middle of a chapter, but this is like a story that sits on its own. So you guys will see when we get there. And you probably never heard this one before. No one's ever heard this story? It's a parable. Yeah, it's a parable. Okay, but you guys know me. It's not going to be milquetoast. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. Everybody ready? Buckled in? The exits are located in the back and behind me. All right. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Give me the share of property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as you treat one of your hired servants.' And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to the father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for my son who was dead is now alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now the older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called to one of the servants. And he asked, 'What are these things meant?' And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound.' But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, 'Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoted your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him?' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. I'm going to end right there, okay? Because the next parable ties in, but for the sake of time, I can just read this straight for you guys, but I stumble, and, I stumble. So what's really interesting about this is we all, from every teaching and everything that I've seen, we spend 80% of time talking about the son who ran away, right? Would you guys agree? Of everything that I've seen or read, everything that I've seen taught on this, about 80% of the time they spend talking about the prodigal son, and 20% they spend on the older brother, right? And I think that's why we have a big problem in the church. Because we focus on the prodigal and we say, well, we were all there, right? We can identify with the prodigal. But then we get comfortable and we do that thing where we can't see the things that are in front of our very own eyes, right? Like we do that all the time. The book of Jonah, you guys remember that? The book of Jonah is so good. It is so good. If you think you're comfortable in your position in life and you've figured it all out, read the book of Jonah and just see it for what it is. It's a huge satire piece that makes fun of every one of us who gets comfortable in our seat and never gets our feathers ruffled. And when we get our feathers ruffled, we say, oh, this can't be. This isn't the way that things are supposed to be. But change should always be constant in our lives. Growth is a painful thing, isn't it? The day you realize that everything that you thought you had figured out gets flipped upside down, that's one of the greatest. That's great. I love it every time that happens to me. So I talk about this because it's very important. And if we don't guard our hearts as the older brother, guess what? We let jealousy in, because that's what the older brother is. He's jealous. And the way I always think about it is because the question arises a lot of times with some of my Baptist friends at work, and even I do have a new friend, and he is a Lutheran. Have you guys ever met a Lutheran? They're very interesting people. But they're very, yeah, well, I mean, I can be too. I'm not going to say that, but it's really hard to nudge them and say, well, wait a second, because there's 360 degrees of perspective, not just 1 degree, right? That's what everyone has the tendency to, this is my view, and this is how I'm going to be, and this I'm never going to change. And that is so sad. It's very sad. I'm glad you guys all agree with me. Now, let's turn the arrow right back around, right? Because the truth is I think a lot of times we get stuck in this mentality of, how could God do this and not do that? And we ask these questions. And one of the biggest ones that outside of why does God allow suffering, now I always answer that question. I flip that question around and I say, why don't more people suffer? That's the real question. If we've all turned our back on God, then what do we truly deserve? So answer that question for me and I can answer your other question. So the thing is, a lot of times we get doctrinal problems, right? Or we think that we've made them into doctrinal problems. And one of the doctrinal problems that people have, especially Methodists, is about the deathbed confession, right? Like if someone lives their whole life completely separated from God, and then all of a sudden, they have a moment of awakening, an absolute moment of awakening, and they confess that Jesus is their Lord, and they feel his love enter their body, and they breathe their last breath. And if I'm honest, when I first became a Christian, it was not a problem for me. It was only like two years in that I was thinking, why would these people deserve it? Why? They lived their life the way that they wanted to. Their entire life, they deserve what they get. Look at all the evil things that they've done in their life. And every time I do that to somebody else, guess what God does to me? Here's the arrow, right? Because all the words that you just said, you can convict yourself of. Like Paul says. Paul says it. Any bad thing that you can say to me or about me, I won't refute it. That willingness, that openness to accept criticism from other people is what allows you to change. And sometimes it's painful and we fight back against it, right? Like there's been times that God has just pulled me by my toe down through a field of briars until I finally said, uncle, right? You guys know that feeling. You've been around. There's enough gray in this room. You guys know that God has pulled you through that. And on the other side of the briars where you're like, oh, that was so terrible. I don't ever want to do that again. Or were you grateful that he showed you what you needed to see in the time that you needed to see it? See, and I think when we ask that question, how could God forgive somebody? I'm going to roll up my sleeves for this one. How could God forgive somebody that's lived their whole life in sin, and at the last moment of their life, they regret everything that they've done? And here's where I turn the question back around. Why would you think that their life was good? Really? Because what you know and what I know, maybe you don't. I'm hoping you guys all do know that God loves you. There's nothing that can separate you from God's love. Ask Paul in Romans. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. You make mistakes, but Dad is still there. You suffer, he's right there with you. And he loves you no matter what. Now, imagine you're that person who never knew God's love, who pursued everything that doesn't make any sense to pursue in this world when you know that you're loved. You know, some of the biggest industries that we have make billions and billions and billions of dollars every year just on telling people that if you do this, people will like you. If you do this, you will be loved. And they manipulate that desire that's in every human's heart to know that someone cares about you. Because that's what we all hunt for, isn't it? That's what we seek. That's what we chase after. Because we are like God. And if we pursue after that, like God does, how much harder does he pursue after us? And we forget that. And we become like the older brother. We take Dad for granted. And we think that the younger brother had it so good, didn't he? But the real question is, how much guilt has that younger brother accumulated? The things he's done. Like in the Psalms, the psalmist says, I've sinned against you alone, O God. And the prodigal son reflects this when he talks to his father. Because he didn't hate his dad. I mean, he wanted to do what he wanted to do. And he was selfish, just like every other child that's ever been born on the planet. Just like most adults we have today. But really, when you ask yourself that question, why would I even be jealous of someone who's lived a life with hogs fighting for pods of food, starving every day? He comes to his dad naked. If he wasn't naked, why would he need the robe? He has nothing left of his inheritance. And his only hope in life is to be a servant in his father's house. And his brother doesn't even refer to him as his brother, does he? And imagine that. We do that to people. We have that kind of jealousy. And what we're really saying underneath all that, underneath that question, is what? You're not good enough, Dad. We're saying the same thing the prodigal son is, but we can't see it with our own two eyes. And why do you think Jesus tells this parable? Because at every instance, the disciples, hey, what about me? If John's going to live a long life, what am I going to do? Peter, look at me. Every time this jealousy pops up in the disciples, Jesus is quick to extinguish it. He's quick. His words are sharp and very astute, because that's the thing that creeps in on all of us, is that jealousy. That jealousy creeps in and you don't even see it. You don't even notice it. Because you're like, well, that person, why is that person elevated higher than anybody else? They don't deserve what they're getting. Does any one of us deserve what God gave to us? It's a good question. Because if you think that you deserve it, then you didn't get it. Do you guys get that? If you think that you deserved what God was willing to do for you and how much he loved, what he was willing to give, If you think that that's what he was obligated to do, then guess what? You're still feeding hogs. You're still trying to eat pods. You're still looking for grains of sand in the desert. And it's very comforting to me to think that my God can forgive whoever he wants to. And then he brings another brother into the fold. I should celebrate. Even though that guy's going to feel guilty. You think the prodigal son, when he came back to his father's house, he said, it would be better for me to just be your servant. You think for one moment that kid or adult, Jesus is not very specific with him, and for good reason, so that we can all identify with the story. Do you think that he felt good? If he's like, hey, you know what? I totally deserve what I'm getting. Dad slaughtered the fatted calf. I totally expected a party when I came home. No, he didn't. And it reminds me, because Jesus didn't just say this parable, he lived it. He's having dinner with a bunch of Pharisees, right? And I'm going to paraphrase. Not Pharisees, I'm going to paraphrase. But he's having dinner with a bunch of Pharisees. And this prostitute comes up to him, and she starts washing his feet with her hair. And they're like, right? This is what they do. They're like, whoa, Jesus. She shouldn't even be in the room. And how does he respond? To the one who's forgiven much, right? So think about that. Why do we put ourselves in the seat of the Pharisees and think that we're better than the other people that God has forgiven? Yeah, well, it's true, Marty. It's true. I heard you. You could say it loud, because we do. We do get selfish. We do. Do you guys know what the base root of selfish is in Hebrew? Or evil? I just gave it away, saying it backwards. Sorry, Hebrew's written backwards. It's written backwards, so when you read it, you got to read it from right to left. So sometimes I say things backwards. But the base root of evil, the word tov, is to be selfish. Right? To hoard all your stuff and say, that's all mine. Don't touch my stuff. I got puppies, right? I told my wife to get a puppy for the goats. To get a little puppy so that I could train the puppy to help me when my son moves out to keep these goats in line. Because I don't know if you guys know this or not. Goats don't understand English. So you tell them go over there and they just look at you, and then they continue to eat grass or go the other direction, or because they do whatever they want. They're animals, right? They're animals, they're goats. So I got a pup. I told my wife, I said, get a puppy. Get a puppy, and we're going to train it to be a goat dog, right? And so my wife goes to the animal shelter. Big mistake on my behalf. Because I say one puppy, I say a puppy. I didn't say one puppy, I said a puppy. Didn't pluralize it, puppies. But she's going to watch this, and she's going to be like, I can't believe you told this story. But anyway, okay, so this is real life stuff. I told her to go get a puppy, and we're going to train the puppy to be a goat dog. And she comes back, or I'm at work, like I always am, and she sends me pictures, and she's like, oh, she sends me pictures, and I see the pictures. She sends me 10 pictures. And I'm looking through the pictures. I'm like, oh, he's cute. Yeah, but he's going to be a goat dog. You have to take that mentality, because that dog has one purpose, to be a goat dog, and that's it. I mean, you don't really pet working dogs, if you guys didn't know that. They're not pets. They work. That's what they do. When a dog has purpose, it will pursue that purpose. That's what brings it joy in life. Dogs are a lot like people in several aspects, and I observe these dogs a lot, and they teach me so much. But anyway, she brings these two puppies home, and I'm scrolling through the pictures, and I'm like, okay, cool, we got the puppy. The puppy that, it's not the one that I had picked out on the website, or whatever it was that she was scrolling through. But I'm like, okay, well, I can work with this dog. And I get home, and I'm like, oh, there he is, right? That's great. And I turn, and my son's on the couch. And she goes, "You didn't see?" And I was like, "What are you talking about? You didn't see?" She's like, "I sent you pictures." And I was like, "Yeah, I saw the dog. The dog's right there." She goes, "No. Turn around." And I look at Sean, and he's on the couch, and there's the other puppy. So she brought 2 puppies home. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but when there's 2 puppies, animals are animals. That's what they do, animal things, right? So when you have 2 puppies, it's twice as hard to train them to be work dogs. And I think my wife knew this underneath it because she wanted another dog in the house, or 2 dogs. And because I gave permission, it was like free for all, right? Bring the animals in, right? Which is funny because the other day I had to bring one of our young female goats in the house, and that was great. It was great. It was an experience. She had a diaper on it and everything. I thought it was hilarious because she goes through all these efforts to do things, and she's going to watch this, and I'm going to be in so much trouble. She goes through all these efforts to be super compassionate toward animals. Like, she puts a diaper on the goat, and she's like brushing the goat, and then I'm like, "All right, it's time for the goat to go back outside," and she's like, "Good." Good, because she gets herself, over her head. But anyway, I love my wife, guys, and I'm not cracking on her. She has a heart of compassion. Ladies, you guys have that. For us guys, we have to work for it. We have to work really hard. You're born with it. We have to work really hard on it. It's usually when we start going real gray that we get that level of compassion, because everything else is just like the work dog. It's purpose-driven. Everything is purpose-driven. So I've got these dogs, and they're super selfish, and they always fight each other, and they're doing dog things. And I was thinking the other day, the question was posed, and I'm like looking at these dogs, and I'm like, well, they are selfish. And then I'm looking at my teenage kids as they're arguing over the video game, and I'm like, wow, you're not much different. They just biting at each other all the time, And it's hard to get a word in edgewise with the dogs or the teenagers. And I just realized, I was like, well, what makes me different than them? I'm observing it. Not much, really. You're right, not much, really. But if I can observe it and I can see the things that are happening in front of my face, maybe I can say, whoa, wait a second. Because once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once you realize something that's going on in your heart, you can't unrealize it. And it's painful, but it causes us to grow. And everything grows toward the light. And if life isn't painful, guess what we're not doing? We're not growing. We're not challenging ourselves on a daily basis, like, Lord, why did I say that? Jesus says, ask, and the answer will be given, right? Seek, and you'll find it. Knock, and the door will be opened. The problem is, we're too busy knowing everything to ask any questions. And we never start the process of growth. We should always be asking those questions. Because where's our heart really? You think you got it all figured out? You're sitting in the same seat as the older brother. Or you're sitting in the seat of Jonah. And either one of those seats is not a good place to be. Because the longer you sit in the seat, a God who loves you will not let you sit there. So thank God for loving us and pushing us out of it. Every time we try to sit in it, guess what God does? No, you think you're safe in the bottom of the boat. Here comes the storm. Oh, throw me in the ocean so that I can die, right? So that he'll never find me here, right? Well, God sends a fish. Oh, this is terrible. I'm dying, right? After he wanted to be thrown into the ocean, he's griping about the situation that he asked to be in. God gave him exactly what he wanted. And what does he do? He sends him to the place where he was supposed to go. Because no matter how hard you try to give up on God, he's not going to give up on you. The question is, can we see it before it happens? Can we realize it before we become the thing that we don't want to be? Because the older brother was just as selfish, if not more so, than his younger brother. And the only reason he stuck around, well, because he had it good, didn't he? He had all of his inheritance. He could always go to Dad for enchiladas, which he didn't make enchiladas last night. It was fajitas. He promised me enchiladas, and I got fajitas. Either way, I'm good. Either way, I got fed. That's the good thing. You know, the quickest way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And I'm starving. I'm starving to death. But anyway, but that's what the prodigal. There's wisdom in that, underneath it, that we constantly seek after. Right? Like go to the book of Job. Job. Did God love Job? And I'm just going to try to squeeze Job into the smallest box that I can here, because Job is an awesome book. And if you guys would just sit down and read it from end to end, and then the first time you read it, you're going to go, there's so much poetry in there. I feel like I got lost in the brush, and I'm just completely lost, right? Most people will take excerpts from Job, where like Job leads up to a point, and then they'll take the excerpt from it, and then they'll be like, here's the picture. But that's not how Job works. Poetry, like the Psalms. The Psalms are poetry. You guys like the Psalms? I love the Psalms. Anytime I feel like I'm lost and I have no direction, guess where I go? To that big, thick section in the middle of the Bible, right? I can't use my phone for that one. I have to feel it. Because the Psalms hit you in a place where you didn't expect it, if you're paying attention. Remember, the poorest person in the room is the one who can't pay attention. So, I got up at 3 o'clock this morning, and I was like, all right, where are we going this morning, Dad? Right? And guess where I ended up? Job. Right there, in the middle of Job. And I'm like thinking about it. And I'm like, well, what does this have to do with the prodigal son? It has everything to do with it, if you're looking for it. Because you think about Job's story. What's Job's story? Job, he's this guy from this place that nobody knows, right? Uz. It's just 2 letters. It's actually 1 letter in Hebrew, if you guys didn't know that. It's just Zavin, which is like a plow, right? He's from the land of work. That's where he's from plowland, okay? So here's this guy, Job. He's from plowland, and he does everything he's supposed to. He follows all the rules. He does everything he's supposed to. He commits to sacrifices. But God, here's Job, and then it exits you from that scene and takes you up into heaven, right? So how far away is God from Job? How far away is Job from God? Because a lot of times we get stuck in this idea, if I just do the right things, guess where I am? I'm good. Okay? I'm going to get cranked up here because these two really relate. So here's Job. He's way over here, and God is way over there. And there's this huge gaping hole in between them. And then, like God, the great author that he is, he illustrates how big the hole is because guess who shows up to the party that God's having way over there? The devil. The devil shows up, doesn't he? The adversary. And then the adversary shows up. And what does he do? Well, God's like, where have you been hanging out at? And the adversary says, well, you know, all over in between the places between you and Job. So if you guys don't believe me, look at it. That's what the Hebrew translates. I've been in every place in between you and Job. And God says, well, wait a second. You didn't go over there. Did you see that guy? Man, he is an awesome guy. I tell you what. And then the devil responds, right? The devil responds, and so the story begins. And the story is the last book of wisdom. And in chapter 30, Job talks about wisdom. Did you know that? It's great. It's great what Job has to say about wisdom. He talks about it like gold in the ground. How Job describes wisdom is like gold in the ground. He says, look at there's animals that walk all over the top of it and never even know that topaz is down there and silver and gold. They do it. They just walk all over the top of the earth. And they never realize the treasure that's underneath it. Okay? You guys, she knows where I'm going with this. Because a lot of times, what do? We're just grazing over the top, aren't we? We're just grazing over the top and never looking for the wisdom that sits underneath. Because that's the way Job describes wisdom. It's like, guess what you've got to do to start finding wisdom? You've got to start digging. And digging, is that fun? So here's this guy whose name is Job. well, like we call it having a job, which stands for just over broke. But here's Job, and he's just doing his thing. And then 29 chapters into his suffering, he comes to this realization of what wisdom is. And now his whole life, he's been skimming over the surface. And he's been like, my whole life, I've got all this stuff. I got all these animals, but it never talks about how much gold Job has because, well, that's the point, isn't it? Because even though the adversary took everything away from him, Job still had one thing. And in the next chapter, that thing shows up. And what's really interesting in the Hebrew, when you read through where Elihu shows up, Elihu, the son of Barkath, from the house of Ram, from the land of... Okay, when you translate those words from the English or from the Hebrew, the actual, what they mean, it's interesting because Elihu's name is God, my God is He. That's what it literally means. That's the only place you'll find Elihu's name in the book of Job. My God is He, okay? And then his dad's name is the one who bows before God. And then he comes from the land of contempt, from the house of anger. So Paul has this interesting thing that he says, and it always sticks in my head. The Jews only know in part, and the Hebrews only know in part, right? Both of us are walking around with one eye open, Hebrews and Gentiles. He says, someday, their eyes will be open and they'll see. What's really interesting to me is that English, what direction is English written in? You guys know? All the Western languages, modern Christian languages are written in, you read this way, don't you? Okay? What's Hebrew written in? Okay, so when you say that story backwards, guess what you get? When you read the Hebrew like you would an English person, you get the entire story of Job in one sentence. Because from anger and contempt, the man fell to his face and God revealed himself. In one sentence. The Jews didn't understand it because they're like, what kind of person walks around with that kind of name? That would be absurd. That would be the cockiest person ever because they're only looking where? At the surface. But Job, the chapter right before that, gave them the directions on how to understand what they were about to get into. Because you know what happens? Elihu shows up, and he's this mysterious character, right? I call him Jesus, but he shows up, and he's like, listen, he gets mad. He gets angry. He gets angry because, well, his friends didn't stand up for him, for one. And it's a whole chapter on how he's mad at his friends and why they didn't stand up for him and how they accused him of all these things. They're just as bad as the adversary who brought all the stuff on it. And then he gets mad at Job because Job thought that he was good enough, that he did all the right things, and because he did all the right things, he shouldn't have to suffer. And then guess what? Elihu just disappears out of the scene. Like you could write this, the greatest movie ever written would be if somebody actually did Job the way it's written. Because Elihu just disappears out of the scene. He's just gone. And then God shows up in a whirlwind. And God says, well, wait a second, Job. Since you know everything, right? You're aged. Stand up and answer me like a man. And tell me if you know where the goats have their kids. Right? Or how the snow comes out of the clouds. Or who pays the electric bill, Job? Right? Because that's what he does. He pulls the dad card on him. I do it to my kids all the time. You guys ever do that to your kids? Like, I pay the bills. You're going to take out the garbage today. Right? You ever do that? And then when you're the kid, from the kid's perspective, or the prodigal, from the kid's perspective, or prodigal, however you want to put it, for the sake of time, you're like, oh, Dad, he's such a tyrant. He's terrible. He makes me do stuff. Right? Us being all grown up now, we realize why Dad did those things, right? Teach us responsibility. Teach us cleanliness, right? Like some of us haven't grasped that concept yet. But to teach us all kinds of things that we should learn in order to be people and not the animals just grazing over the top of the ground. Dad's the one who digs into your chest and finds the treasure, and he says, listen, this is how you do it. And you don't like it. It's not fun. And when you ask those questions, it's when you really get the answer, when you ask the genuine question and you say stuff like, God, how could you forgive somebody like that? And he answers you, it is very uncomfortable. It's painful even. It's like, Dad, how could I even think that? Why would you let me think that? It's your fault for everything. No, I don't pull a Job. I don't pull a Job. But Job says, at the end of the story, guess what? Job is vindicated, isn't he? All the things he accused God of being cruel. Job goes as far as doing the Sam Harris argument, that if God is real, he's just the big kid on the anthill. Right? Job accuses him, that same line of argumentation, Job uses against God. So if you guys think Sam Harris is, you guys know who Sam Harris is? He's like one of the new atheist thing, weird. I read his book, and you know it's so funny? Sam Harris comes to the same conclusion that Jesus comes to while denying Jesus. It's so funny, because he's like, we should have an inner morality that comes from a higher source or idea. And I'm like, dude, you're just arguing Jesus. You're just saying that you're an atheist. He's like the opposite. He's like the sheep. No, wait. He's like the wolf. No. He is a sheep that's trying to dress up like a wolf. That's what his book comes off to me. So if you guys, you could read Sam Harris's book if you want, but it's just a big old argument on how Western values are the right values, and all you have to do is add Jesus came up with that first to every paragraph that he writes, and his whole book is rebuked. It's just undone. Anyway, I don't want to talk about Sam Harris too much. But here's the thing, we're always skimming off the surface, and we're never digging into the good stuff. We're never asking the questions, like, God, why did I look at that person that way? Or why did I get angry that way? Because when you really ask those questions honestly from your heart, and you say, okay, I'm going to deal with this right now. Me and Dad, we're going to sit down and have a conversation. He responds. Some of you are wondering, why did Dad never, maybe you don't hear him because you're not asking the right questions, or maybe you don't hear him because you're not paying attention. But I guarantee you he answers you when you ask those questions. And, I did this interesting exercise about where you take 5 places in your life where you could be better, and you ask the questions. You just ask the questions. How could I be more giving? How could I be more compassionate? How could I have more time to do things? Yeah, when you sit down and you write those questions, I'm not going to tell you guys all my questions. Too personal. You guys have your own Jobs to wrestle with. But when you sit down and you start answering those questions, pay attention right afterwards, because stuff starts happening. And if you don't pay attention, you're not listening, you're not seeing, because God doesn't always respond to us in an audible way, right? Like if you listen to the prophets, just go read through Ezekiel or Isaiah. Isaiah is one of my favorites because he is a painter. He is a painter of words. Because Isaiah, when he goes and he says, God has a prophecy, he's like, you guys seen that flagpole over there? You guys seen the path where the wall is about to fall over on top of it? How about the fences that are falling over and taken care of? That's you priests, right? You know why he uses those illustrations when he goes and he prophesies to the priests? Because those are the things that he saw. God put them directly in his path on his way to go tell the priests how terrible they were, what terrible job they were doing. If we don't pay attention, guess what? We miss the point completely. And sometimes it takes a little bit of mining down deep to pull the wisdom out that we should be seeking and actively pursuing on a daily basis. That's me when I was a young kid. When I was young, people used to tell me these things like, you are so intelligent. You're beyond your years in intelligence. You have a way with words. And I would hear all those things, and guess what? I'm a selfish kid. So what do? I just take everything for granted, right? I don't develop any of those skills. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm like, oh, well, it's given to me. I got it. I'll use it when I have to and just play video games when I don't. And the scary thing is what person could I have been if I had activated or acted on that potential? I mean, I'm telling you, it's not too late. Abram was how old when God showed up? When he finally decided to ask the question? Like, God, what do you have in store for my life? Abram was an old man. I'd say he's got all of us beat before he even started his adventure with God. But the thing is, if we don't ask those questions, we don't grow in our potential of the person that we're supposed to be. Your body has over 6 billion different types of cells that are just waiting to be activated. And every time you experience something new, I'm going to get into some science here, so strap in. You guys know that every time you experience something new, it doesn't just change the thought pattern in your head. It actually changes your DNA. Your DNA actually changes. So like, if you just sit on the couch all the time, and that's what you experience, guess what your body does? Starts going, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit on the couch. We're going to watch, what is it people watch now on TV? I don't watch TV, but we're going to watch Oprah, right? Or Jerry Springer. So your body adapts. And it's like, yeah, tell me about it, right? Tell me about it. Like, you guys have seen Jerry Springer and Oprah. Or The View. That's a good one, too. You sit down and you watch The View. Guess what your body does to your DNA? It's like, okay, well, your body is just a vessel. And your body's going to adapt to whatever your spirit wants. So, you sit down and you watch The View all day long, and guess what? You're running around like my puppies, just nipping at everybody else. Because you've turned yourself into just an animal. You eat Cheetos or whatever it is that you do when you watch The View. I don't know. Is it cheese puffs? I don't know. But your body actually adapts itself. So if you look, there's people that do like really amazing things. Like there's people who dive in the ocean. They go spearfishing. You guys ever watch people who go spearfishing? They can hold their breath for 10 minutes. Up to 10 minutes. And be active at the same time. Their DNA actually starts to change their body from the inside out. Because they asked, can I do this? Well, let's start the process. You know, I painted for a little while there. I've not painted in almost a year now, but I painted for a little while. And what's really interesting about learning these new skills that I think I know everything already, I painted and started trying to play the violin. Don't ask me to play the violin for you guys, okay? Please. It would be terrible for all of us, right? For one, I would change 3 shades more red, and you guys would, it'd be like in the movie Sinbad where they go to the sirens. You'd be, stuffing cotton in your ears and stuff. But anyway, when I first started to paint, I was watching Bob Ross and other guys who do tutorials of how to paint. And I was like, it can't be that hard. You guys should see some of my first paintings. I mean, my daughter, who was a little bit younger than she is now, did a better job starting out than I did. But I was devoted. I was like, I can do this. Just buckle down and just keep working hard. And guess what? Painting 2, garbage. I threw them in the garbage. I threw them all in the garbage as I was painting them. I got to painting 20, and I was like, okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to do. You guys know how much paint costs? Yeah, so I spent a lot of time, effort, and treasure on trying to make a painting that I wanted it to turn out the way that I had envisioned it, okay? And it wasn't perfect, but I moved several steps. I was like, okay, so that's all right. But I'm judging it based on what I thought it was supposed to be. So I threw it in the garbage too, right? So I get to like 30 paintings, 30. And I've painted 30 of them now. I carefully study and I try to do everything that I can to paint all these paintings. And I paint number 30 and I'm like, oh, that's great. And I gave it to my dad. And then I gave several people different paintings because I just kept painting them. And the reason I started giving people paintings was because my wife she didn't let me throw those paintings away. Did you know it? She didn't let me throw them away. She collected them. And then one day she took all my paintings from the first one to the 30th one, and she put them all over the walls in my house. And I looked at it, and I was like, well, that one's not terrible, but that one's better. And then that one is even better than that one. And that one's better than that one. Until I got to the point where I was like, well, maybe people will appreciate it if it's good enough. If I haven't mastered the skill yet. I started giving my paintings away to people. And when people started saying, wow, that is awesome, you did that, I stopped painting. You know why? There's no room for growth anymore. If people accept the thing that I've given, then guess what? Why would I even pursue it? Because ultimately, the pursuit is of wisdom. It's not of me being able to do stuff. Right? Like the story of Job, he wants to do stuff to establish the relationship. That's not how God operates. God operates, we have a relationship, now I'm going to teach you wisdom and you're going to do stuff. We have it all backwards. Right? Just like the prodigal son and his brother, both just as selfish as each other, almost exactly the same. The one had to go through the pig pens to find out how good his dad really was. And the other never did. Or maybe he did eventually. I don't know if he asked the right questions. Because the questions he asked were all based around, well, why are you bringing him this stuff? Didn't he just spend all his money on prostitutes? They weren't the right questions. Because the real questions are, Dad, what am I doing? How can we be better today? Because if I'm not better, then if I'm not a better person today than I was yesterday, I just wasted a day. And how many days do I have to waste? None, if you know and realize how much God really loves you. Because the days that you waste hurt his heart. Because your dad knows the potential of the person you can be, you just haven't realized it. Amen? I had to end on such a heavy note. Maybe I should tell a joke. You guys want to hear a joke? I hear some rumbling from the foyer. Okay, so two guys. And this might, I just want light. I just want to lighten it up, okay? Because it is heavy to realize that you may be wrong about everything you ever thought in your life. But that's a good thing, right? Then when you see life from that perspective, guess what? It is great. I love it. I love it. And sometimes I forget it. And I have to be reminded of it constantly. And Dad will wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and be like, all right, let's go into the densest Hebrew poetry that I ever wrote. Right here. And I'm like, oh, great. Here we go on a journey. So anyway, speaking of a journey, there's these two guys, and they're sitting at the airport. I'm going to try to make this relevant to the topic we just talked about. Two guys sitting at the airport, and one guy, he gets thirsty for a Coke, but he doesn't have any money. So he comes up with this idea. And he goes and he sits down next to another gentleman. And he says, hey, I've got an idea for a game, and we're going to play this game. And what's going to happen is you're going to buy a Coke, and we're going to ask each other questions until we can't answer our own question. And you're just trying to kill time, right? So he's like, oh, sure, I got 50, well, what would it be now? I got $5.75. I'll buy a Coke. Right? That's a joke in and of itself. Inflation, get it? Anyway, I just got a few minutes here. So I know it's not really that funny. You don't throw daggers at me. We all got to pay the same price. It's funny to me because it's just stuff. So anyway, he goes and he buys the Coke, and then he goes, all right, I'm going to ask the first question. The guy who came up with the game, who wanted the Coke, who didn't have the money, he says, I'm going to ask the first question. He's like, all right, go ahead and ask your question. He says, how does a rabbit dig his burrow and not get any mud on the outside? And the guy just looks at him, he cocks his head. It's like, oh, how is he going to answer this question, right? That's what he's thinking in his head. The guy says, well, how does a rabbit dig his burrow and not get any on the outside? And he finally answers his question, and he says, oh, because he starts from the inside. And the other gentleman says, whoa, wait a second. He says, how does the rabbit start from the inside? He says, that's not my question, that's yours. And he takes the Coke, right? So ask the right questions. Right, guys? So I'm just going to end with a word of prayer, and then we'll release the doors and let